The time is now for regional governments to develop and implement disruptive and forward-thinking program concepts, policies, and platforms that fast-track the development of a Caribbean technology economy. At the core of this, my friends, transformation must be the sustainable maximization of our most highly valued assets. You know them, and I know them. Our people, our ideas, our geography, our climate, yes, our climate, and our culture.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of our CLIP Speaker Series. My name is Crystal Legrand from the COESL, the Caribbean Center for Excellence for Sustainable Livelihoods. This is our third edition of the series, and our first edition began on the topic of climate-smart agriculture. Our second edition continued to focus on climate adaptation technologies. And tonight, we are joined by two brilliant female entrepreneurs, Miss Leisa Perch, and as well as Miss Theolojo Telly, Vakerie Onu, who will present on the topic of funding innovation for climate resilience. The Caribbean Youth Livelihood Internship Program, better known as CLIP, is part of the Strengthening Disaster Resilience in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean, SDCR. This project is designed and implemented by the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. CLIP has been conceptualized as mainly a virtual internship program which fosters pathways for entrepreneurial development in the areas of science and technology for recent graduates of tertiary academic institutions in the Caribbean. For a maximum of 9 months, the CLIP focuses on assisting youths whose employment opportunities have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and other factors. CLIP implementation is made possible by the generous support of the American people through the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. But before we delve into our presentations this evening, we would like to kickstart this presentation tonight with a polling question. And I will launch the poll now so that you can select as many of the options from our poll. So give me 1 second. Let's pull up the poll so that you can see it. So our first polling question for this evening, the question is, if you were about to start a business, how many of the sources of funding listed below are you currently aware of? Please select as many options as you know. And so you can go ahead and take a moment to answer this question as we transition over to our first speaker. At the end of the presentation from our first speaker, I will read the results of this poll. Our first speaker tonight is Miss Leisa Perch, and she is from SAEDI Consulting Barbados, Inc., and she is the Managing Director, Founder, and Practice Manager, a woman-led social enterprise, and she has more than 25 years in international development, working for more than 20 years on environmental management issues. She has provided technical expertise at the national, regional, and international levels, including research to inform policy and decision-making processes from the social and gender perspective. She has contributed to several global and national reports, including IPCC FAR, the first Global Gender and Environmental Outlook, and the sixth Global Environmental Outlook. She leads the work of the practice, negotiates contracts, seeks out opportunities, and expands the company's portfolio of work while leading the head office and research terms. She is a member of the Caribbean Action Learning Group on Green Economy. Advancing Women Development, and serves on the Advisory Council of the Society for Gender Professionals. She continues to seek to grow the company and its work on climate change adaptation and mitigation, recently building up a portfolio of work in the renewable energy. Her company seeks via its work with clients to assure that climate finance via projects and programs enables a just and equitable transition that displaces social and economic and reduces and mitigates as much as possible. In meeting is social and environmental justice commitments. SAEDI Consulting has also signed on to the Women Empowerment Principles, or WEPs, and the UN Global Compact. Help me welcome Ms. Leisa Perch to our speaker series this evening.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. And so as we kickstart our speaker series this evening, our first question for you is, how many years have you been in business?
Thank you for this question, Crystal, and thanks so much for that very kind introduction. Before I answer your question, I do want to acknowledge CIMH, COESL, and USAID for this series and for this opportunity. So Saedi Consulting is running towards its second year, the end of its second year of operation on August 9th. And in this vein of this new consulting business that I'm running, I would have been doing this since 2017 when I left the UN.
Thank you. And our follow-up question is, what unique value does your business contribute to the efforts of climate resilience in the Caribbean region?
Ooh, what a nice weighty question to get us started off with. So Saedi Consulting, Barbados Inc. Comes out of a lot of years of work at navigating the space between the society and environment. And so we bring a very specific and unique lens which blends social, gender, and environment. We look at this in the context of climate change resilience, adaptation, as well as mitigation. We also bring environmental issues into climate work and vice versa, and natural resource management. So what I think we do is we bring a very people-centered, societal and socio-environmental perspective to the challenges that the region is facing. And we do that through a number of opportunities to do assessments, to collect new data, to do new research, to bring the voices of persons who are not normally in the conversation or who just don't have the time to make sure that those are heard and that they inform the final output, whether it's a project document, a policy strategy. We also help those who are doing this kind of work to improve what they're doing, to strengthen what they're doing, and to be able to actually apply a gender lens to their work.
That is a mouthful of unique resources, and we are sure that you have been and will continue to provide valuable resources to our community here in the Caribbean. So without any delay, I would like to hand over the CLIP speaker series to you to go through your presentation this evening, and then we will be back with our questions. And we invite the audience as well to drop your questions in the comments. If you would like to ask a question after Ms. Perch's presentation, you can also unmute your mics, but if you prefer to, you can just type them into the comments. So if there's any question that pops up as Ms. Perch is going through her presentation, please go ahead and drop those in the chat, and I will read them for you after the presentation. So over to you, Ms. Perch. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Crystal. So very happy again to be here and to share a little bit of our perspective on some of the issues that will be discussed this evening, and to share a little bit of Saedi's Consulting's experience over the last couple of years and where we see ourselves going. So I think it's important to anchor what we do in the context of a world that is definitely shifting and changing, not just in the climate, the weather, and the physical interactions, but also in terms of opportunities. And the job market, the business market has definitely expanded over the last 5 to 10 years. And so as we do our work, we see amazing new opportunities, whether it's in installation and maintenance around renewable energy, or even renewable energy services, sharing information, providing connections between people and finance so that everyone can participate in the green transition. There is sustainability consulting, which we're involved in, even as a social impact entrepreneur, sustainable food creation, sustainable fashion, and more, we're also seeing opportunities to help persons green their businesses and their business operations. And so there's a lot out there for anyone, including the interns that are part of this program. And I'm hoping that as we discuss this evening, you'll start to see yourself in some of these spaces. Saedi Consulting operates at the intersection of gender and environmental justice. And as I note, a lot of the work that we do centers around climate and climate resilience. We also do work on environment itself, looking at specific natural resources like water and energy. And then we also work on natural resource management, including ecosystems. That means that when we come to the table, we try to help our clients and our partners to really understand why a gender lens is key, how it will help them to open up to see new opportunities, but also to see things that perhaps were there before, but were not very visible, how they get to think about how people and people's situation, social norms, et cetera, influence how people even use resources, and how they will be either resilient or less resilient to climate change, depending on the context. I think a key message for us is that you can do work on equality and justice and earn an income and run a company. Now, it might not be the fastest moving business, but it is a business that is never less than busy. Our hands are always full generally, and particularly at this time of year. And we see ourselves as having turned, in a way, our cause into a business opportunity, but that cause still drives us as we do our business. We do our work in a number of ways. A lot of it involves a lot of research and writing, but part of it's also translating how issues that perhaps were not at the forefront of the discussion at 40, 50 years ago now need to be, and how you do so effectively, the kind of tools and instruments that you need to use. Part of what we do then also includes capacity building assessments to understand what about these things are clear and not clear. What are the ways in which persons can become more familiar and more comfortable, and also ensuring that we can provide access to information, but also to do sensitization and training. Key in defining this space over the last 6 or 7 years, as I moved from being an individual consultant to a business operation and then to an incorporated company, has been knowing the audience, and also perhaps a little bit of luck, in the sense that when I left knowing that I wanted to do more gender work, it coincided with the fact that a lot of funders were also looking to make sure that gender assessments, gender action plans were absolutely going to be key and were now mandatory for all projects. And knowing that audience and understanding the audience is a beautiful thing. It's also a complicated thing. The audience is different depending on if it's the funder, if it's the person who's mobilizing the resources, the persons you're trying to help. You have to understand all of those and to figure out a way to put that into one package and to help all those parties also to understand each other. An exciting part of our work is the fact that normally those persons don't talk to each other, and they certainly don't talk about social and gender issues. Knowing what makes us unique is also key. And one of the key strategies we have is stakeholder engagement, i.e. bringing people together, identifying those stakeholders, making them as diverse as possible, and finding ways to engage with them no matter what their opportunities or their challenges will be. That means that we talk not just to government officials, but to persons with disabilities, Indigenous people, no matter how remote they are. We're talking to people who are working, we're talking to people who are not working. And to do that, we have to leverage partnerships, not only in identifying opportunities and being successful in gaining them, but also in terms of implementing the work that we do. And to be able to reach out sometimes to an Indigenous community that's far away with limited access to internet means that we need to work with our partners to be able to make some of those connections. But key in all of this, as well as we do this work and we think about our social impact, we also are wary or aware of the fact that we need to manage our resources well for our own sustainability, but that we need to also be mindful of how we're working and with whom we're working. And that all money is not necessarily good money. And that means that we need to take a risk management approach, not just in terms of working with our clients, but in terms of who we work with and also how we work with them. Now, the climate finance is a very hot topic. It's a very critical issue in climate resilience. Hard to be resilient if you don't have resources or access to resources. And the way in which we tackle this issue, a lot of this comes through the projects and the programs that we support for our clients and mobilizing resources for them. The way that we look at this is at a two-part approach, where one aspect of it is working with our clients to ensure that the climate finance that they're mobilizing or have mobilized can be deployed well, that they're really thinking through about who really needs the support and what are the barriers that will prevent them from accessing the opportunities they may be presenting. Another part of that is that when we finish our work, we want to make sure that our clients and partners can continue this work. They can continue to build on the foundation that we built together. And so we want to make sure as well that we build their capacities, we help them with their policies, tools, and technologies to be able to undertake this work. Right now, if I look at our work and I had to put it in 3 bundles, we have one that really looks at access and use of climate finance, and that includes working with clients to mobilize or access finance through either the Global Environment Facility or the GCF, mitigating with equity. So that has a 2-part and lens to it. It is about the renewable energy and mitigation part of the work, but it's also making sure that as we do whatever work we're doing on climate resilience, all intended to do well, that we recognize that there are risks and there are possible impacts, there are dislocations, there are disruptions, there are displacements that will be affecting those who are already vulnerable. And we need to plan for that, and we need to make sure we can mitigate against the impact of that. Last but not least is making sure that we don't lose sight of the need for women's participation and representation in climate decision-making and decision-making fora. Yes, we've made improvements over the last 5 to 10 years, but there's still a number of issues out there. And part of this is understanding where these barriers and gaps are, what is driving them, and also making sure we can identify strategies to counteract them. And so part of this work, we're working with one of our partners now to look at this in the context of the UNFCCC negotiations. And this is critical work, because if we want to have the finance, if we think about PM Motley and the issues she's been raising, if we think about how the finance is even identified, how it's being discussed and negotiated over, that means it's also important to have the right set of people in the room to ensure that all of the issues that are required are there on the table, so that those who then provide the resources have the right frameworks. We are clearly working in a space, even in sustainability consulting, where we are kind of going a little bit against the norm. This is a relatively new kind of work that we're doing. And it means that we have finding ways to compete in what is still generally a mainstream economy. To do that, I think the things I've learned over the last 2 years include the fact that we need to be very disciplined about what we do. Even if there are strategic opportunities, we need to be able to justify it well and to position it within the core business and core business model that we have. That model is basically one where we work remotely and virtually. So our physical impact and our use of resources is also very light. We travel when needed, but we try to do a lot of our work remotely as well. And it also means that I work with associates that are not just based in Barbados, but based across the world. And I can talk about that a little later. It means that we shouldn't be afraid to be first to the market to innovate. That's part of the job. Sometimes you have to enter into something new and break new ground. And that is an exciting part of the job. It does have its challenges and it does have its risks, but it also works well when it works. Product homogeneity is important, because we want to make sure that we're doing things disciplined and that we're doing it in a robust and technical way. But we also want to make sure that when we're doing our work, we're giving each client something different. We're giving them a different perspective, a different set of insights. We're bringing something new to the table, at every opportunity. Last but not least is social engagement and marketing. We need to be visible in order to be able to influence the discussions out there, even outside of our own projects, but also be able to mobilize new partnerships or to gain new opportunities. We also have to be visible. And that is also giving a key part of our strategy in terms of continuing to build our business and to be able to access new opportunities. And so, for example, when we do that and we think about how we position ourselves around the issue of climate finance, we were able to do some very interesting work recently, with a couple of agencies in terms of really thinking about how do you do gender responsive climate budgeting. And whether you're working in a government, although this is mostly positioned for governments, or you're working on a project, there are some things you need to think about in terms of making sure that you don't leave people behind, that you're inclusive, that you're really generating and expanding opportunities. Critical to this also is making sure that we're accountable not just to ourselves, but also to others. And so we're accountable in terms of, walking our talk. And that means that we look at our own corporate social responsibility. And so in this vein, this year, we've opened up a new opportunity to support other organizations, NGOs, on really promoting gender and climate lobby and advocacy, because we also believe it's key and it needs to happen at different levels. It means that when we join the WEPs or we join the Global Compact, that we commit and are accountable to external parties in terms of how we do our work, the way we treat each other, the way we treat with the issues, and the kind of results, quality and quantity, that we're producing, particularly as we promote ourselves as a social impact entrepreneur, but we also promote ourselves as a business working on gender equality. When we think about innovative finance in the social space, as we try to actually build a business that is driven around social issues in an environmental context, there are a number of things that we need to think about. And we have to position ourselves in understanding where the green energy transitions are going, for example, and how we blend what we do in terms of our approaches and our tools to make sure that we bring to the table very clear messages, information, and recommendations that then are actionable. And that means ways of thinking about how it translates into different forms of resilience. Likewise, when we work on enhanced direct access, we want to make sure that we're really taking a really good look at what are the challenges and the issues, and that the persons that we're working with at the project level are also able then to go and engage with banks and other funds and community groups, and to be able to make sure that those resources really move and actually deliver on the outcomes and the ambitions of the project. When we look at issues of conflict and displacement, for example, which was a new area for us last year, it really brought to mind things that are happening in the region, including the movement that we have around disasters and climatic events, and how we really need to start thinking differently about what this means for persons' livelihoods, for their lives, and also for the ways that they generate new opportunities, and even for their businesses. And so this is just an example of the way in which we charted a path to really look at how gender, climate, conflict, and displacement really intersected, and what were some of the opportunities coming up. Through that project, we were actually able to develop a proposal for the client that they were then able to take to one of their donors, and to then implement work in at least 2 countries, one in 2 different regions, also allowing for them to then see what are some of the lessons learned that could then build a more substantive program. We have some resources here that I've highlighted, and they come from some of the work that we're doing and some of the work that we're involved in. Part of what we do, or the commitment we've made, is that part of our work needs to blend not just the business side, but also making sure that we have some level of our time that we volunteer for other activities. So we're part of the Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, for example, and we will continue to do those kind of activities to continue to support the Caribbean region as it moves forward really on these issues that are very pertinent, that are critical and vital, but also key to our survival. I want to stop there. I look forward to the questions and the discussions, and I'm also very much looking forward to hearing Telly's presentation and your engagement with her in the next part of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Perch, and thank you so much for the wealth of information that you shared this evening. And so I do have some questions that we've pre-prepared for you, but I would like to invite our audience as well to drop their questions into the chat. So let's just take a look at the chat here first, and then if anything, we can also get to our questions.
Sure.
So the first question that I see in the chat here, it says, why aren't the governments, for example, making use of the GCF to plant large amounts of mangroves, thus increasing their ability to earn further carbon credits, etc.?
Well, very good question. So I think there are some efforts to look at ecosystem-based services, which is what Ms. Pascal is talking about here. But I think one of the challenges that we would have is that we don't necessarily have, a fully robust carbon credit system and market in the region. And so I think that would have to walk alongside the investment of developing the proposals and getting that funding from the JEF. You don't want to wait until you have the mangroves planted to then be thinking about that. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is that we would need to do more really to ensure that we could actually benefit from such a market. There are lessons that we can learn from other parts of the of the world on this. So for example, there is work going on and actually doing this to make sure it can generate opportunities for women's groups in Asia. And so there's a group that I work on called WOCAN that has been doing this for quite a while. And so this, I think, is one of the areas, and I think there will be more on ecosystem-based adaptation and the carbon credits coming up. But I think we need to make sure that also the financial systems that we have can also generate these credits, not just for countries, but can also generate them for communities who will, in the end of the day, also have to maintain and sustain, the mangroves and the ecosystems. Second question, do you want me to just jump into that, Crystal? Because I can.
Yeah, you can definitely.
Sure.
So just for the audience sake, I can read it for you. So
Okay,
will
sure.
you offer services to help businesses interested in climate? Oh my goodness. So questions are popping up now.
Yeah.
So one.
So yes, I am happy to do that. We have done work like this before in helping businesses to green their operations. We've done a little bit of work on that, not in this region necessarily, but in Africa with a long-standing partner that we've had, with the Austrian government. It was a really good experience, and we definitely want to do more of that and see how we can support businesses in doing that. There's a lot of opportunity there, and so we'd be happy to support on that. I see another question about me starting
Yes.
solo, and then so I
Yes.
moved from being a one-person shop to having kind of like part-time support from former interns, to then having a team and actually building a company. Oh, I left home. Cicely believes that I had a plan to transition to each stage. Well, I guess I did in my mind, right? So, I feel that it's important not to lie, when it is about things that sometimes you have to just work with the flow. But see, more seriously, it was about the volume of work that I was having and the ability to be able to cope with the volume of work and juggle multiple deliverables. It was also about the right time in terms of making a transition from being a one-person shop to where I was working more with other firms and really wanted to also be the lead consultant on certain things and having the capacity to do that. And to do that, you also do need some support. Part of it was also around the fact that we're getting greater demand for training and capacity building, a lot of that during COVID. And one of the things we found out, you find out about Zoom is if you want to do breakout groups, you need people, you need hands to be able to support those systems. So those were some of the things that drove, the adjustment. But some of it also was the fact that the business was growing. There was no way I was going to be able to handle the load all by myself. And also I was lucky enough to connect with a couple of great partners who were able to facilitate access to people, that are part of my team now, and I've been a part of my team for a while. I was able to count on some friends, including one that I see in the room, who was willing to join. And so it's a number of things that influence the transition from, Leisa to, team.
Absolutely. And so the next question is actually, how do you make income as a consulting firm?
You see, Sisney is really just asking all the really good questions today. It's not easy, is what I will tell you, because you make income and you have the contracts, but getting paid is not always the easiest thing. There are lots of bureaucratic systems on the other side. And sometimes you may be working with a consulting firm and they're your client, but they have the other client, the main client. And so you have a number of hoops to go through before something is cleared, and therefore you get paid. I think what I've learned though is that there are ways and there are types of projects that you need to manage. And one of the key things is just thinking about your payment flow and looking at, the balance of your projects to make sure that you have income coming in every month. That takes a little bit of finessing, but it's not impossible. It's just an adjustment, don't worry, off screen, I will be moaning and groaning like everybody else. But the reality is that you learn from each year, and then you learn also what are the stronger parts of your year and the weaker parts of the year, and then you try to plan for that. And so this is how we're able to do it. As I said, luckily, in some ways, there are not many of me and the firm out there in the Caribbean or elsewhere. So we are in still a pretty good niche, but obviously that's never going to remain the same. So we have to be competitive. And so by building up a good portfolio, being able to deliver even under very strict deadlines is also part of the way that we continue to sustain our business and to get repeat business
Great.
from some people.
Absolutely. And so we have a question from Mr. Alden. He says, for a new entrepreneur, I assume that it may be difficult to choose who to work with from an ethical and vision perspective. Should the new entrepreneur look for other sources of funding, though it may be more difficult?
That's a good point. I mean, yes, it's easy to say be ethical, but we've all got to eat. So I think it's about managing your risk. I would say follow your instincts. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't right. Even if it's not right, but you have questions, the wonderful thing about this age is that you can go on Google and find out most things about anybody. There are also sites where you can see where persons might have been banned for consultancies, etc. But I would say for the new entrepreneur, really try to get a sense of this person, this source of funding, and where they're coming from and whether it really matches you, and what will be the risk if there is no match. If you know that you are going to be visible and social and public in a way where your values or your position on things will be really important, then your risk will be higher. If that's not going to be your thing, then you could probably be a little bit more risky. I would also say that one of the things is definitely to make sure you have as diverse a group or a set of sources as possible. You don't want to be reliant on any one source, because I work on gender. Gender is about power. Any kind of power imbalance can be to your disfavor in the end of the day. And so you don't necessarily want to stick too long to one source. If you have an angel investor or a certain type of funder in the beginning, you take what you have. But then you want to make sure that you can diversify, you make it as diverse as possible, and that you also seek opportunities to really do different types of work as well that would also give you a little bit more ability to manage any risk that may come along.
Yeah, so absolutely, financial planning then is the advice to be able to build that sustainability. So we have one final question here from our audience. It is, are software-based climate solution prevalent in the Caribbean? Example, tools to help solar installations determine how much solar panels a roof can accommodate with satellite imagery without visiting installation sites?
That is a very good question. I'm not sure I'm going to be the person to give you the strongest or most robust response to it. What I can say to you is that in my current sense of the work that we're doing on energy, is that we don't necessarily have a lot of solutions that, and we are a region where we don't promote R&D a lot, but there are some very keen minds out there who are looking for different kinds of solutions. So I wouldn't want to say that they don't exist. The question will be how accessible they are and if they've been given the right kind of support. But right now, I haven't seen a lot of these. So I think there's space for the development of this kind of tool that could also help persons be, a multi-source of solutions rather than having to get one person for installation, another person for maintenance, another person for checking. And so I think that may be the space for this kind of technology to allow someone to have a kind of multi-service kind of business that really allows them to be able to respond to different levels of the value chain for solar installations. And again, will also reduce their risk of having, dips in income flow. So I would say that I think this is an area of growth. I haven't seen much on this as yet.
Absolutely. So there's several opportunities here in this space. And so we're hopeful that our audience got a lot of value from your responses and as well as your presentation. We'll have you back at the end of Ms. Onu's presentation. And so persons can still come at the end with any final questions they may have, and as well as hear your final words. So thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the questions as well.
You're welcome. And so, as I mentioned when we began, we did our polling question, and our question again was, if you were about to start a business, how many of the sources of funding listed below are you aware of? And so the top response was loans, your savings. So in fact, let me share the results so that you can see it. So our top responses again was loans from the bank or credit unions, your savings, grant funding, and borrowing from friends and family. And then there's some variety when it comes to some of the other options. And the lowest scoring was, of course, decentralized finance when it comes to cryptocurrency and stable coins. So thank you so much for participating in our polling questions. We will have another poll again at the end of Ms. Onu's presentation, but we will transition straight into her presentation now so that you can hear from her. 1 second. Let's stop sharing. Great. So with us tonight, our second speaker is Ms. Vakerie Onu, and she has been on the forefront of innovation and ecosystem building with a focus on digital and climate finance innovation, and is a strong advocate for multidimensional transformation for more equitable, inclusive, and resilient economies. Ms. Unum is the head of governance and execution at the Bantu Blockchain Foundation and the Bantu Network Services Limited, which operates and maintains a purpose-built layer 1 DLT infrastructure that supports Web3 primitive, fundable, and as well as non-fungible, so fungible and non-fungible digital assets. Ms. Unum is also the blockchain infrastructure governance specialist at Interstellar. She holds an executive master's in e-governance and an in-demand expert in digital finance, climate finance, entrepreneurship, innovation, transformation, and leadership. Vakerie has collaborated throughout her career with international development organizations, regional institutions, regional and national regulators, industry ecosystem enablers, companies and organizations, including the World Bank, UN, GIZ, and German Savings Bank Group Foundation for Cooperation, to name a few. She is a thought leader, an international speaker, and writer with a passion for realizing multidimensional impact. In 2022, she was awarded the 100 Women in Finance Chartered Alternative Investment Analyst Charter Scholarship, and Ms. Unum has been featured in various media outlets, including Forbes, VCTV, and ICT Pulse, to name a few. Welcome, Ms. Unum. How are you?
Wow, is that me? I mean, I don't kind of recognize who you're talking about right there.
And that was just the tip of the iceberg. That was just the highlight reel. So thank you so much for joining us here this evening. And similar to how we began with Ms. Perch, please tell us, how long have you been in business?
Okay, nearly my entire life. Officially, formally, I would say it's been about 20, this year will make 26 years that I've had Quintessence Consulting. And obviously, I was independent before that, maybe 5 years before. So I've always been an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur.
Full time, absolutely. And so our next question is, what unique value does your business contribute to the efforts of climate resilience in the Caribbean region?
Okay, that's a toughy question because over the years we've done a number of things. So as you see later in my presentation, I'm founder, managing director of Quintessence Consulting, which is really a boutique consulting firm, management consulting firm, and we do a lot of international development projects. Part of our focus deals with both macro issues as well as micro issues. So from looking at an enabling environment and doing some business reform, working with governments, to actually working with startups and SMEs and creating the ecosystem, we've kind of done a lot of it. So specific to climate finance and climate adaptation, Well, my background is I also have a background in climate adaptation finance. And I found that it's an area that not much people have focused on. Yes, a lot of focus and emphasis is always on renewable energy because you can measure it, you can monetize it, very easy conversation. But when you start looking at developmental aspects, us looking at building resilience, it does require a lot of financing, but there isn't enough like expertise focused on that. So I decided to specialize in that and also to look further into project financing because most of building your climate resilience focuses on infrastructure. So when I'm not doing some of the innovation stuff, I'm actually supporting from a consulting side in transformation projects to deal with that. So like, for instance, I'm currently the National Project Coordinator for one of the GCF Green Climate Fund readiness programs for St. Kitts and Nevis, where I live. And that particular project has a focus on two sides, supporting and strengthening public sector, certain public sector institutions, including metrology services. So thanks CIMH, we're supporting the Met Office here and building the capacity, both from the perspective of, again, legal frameworks, but also from a technology standpoint. So under the project, we're looking at implementing data repositories and also looking at implementing storm surge model to help them with early warning, etc. We also have a private sector access to finance component, which now introduces the private sector to different funds and also the how to secure some of the financing from the Green Climate Fund. So that's some of the stuff we do there. In my presentation, you see some other stuff that I'm working on in the region.
Absolutely. And so you've already given us a teaser into who you are as an entrepreneur and the impact that you're making in the region. And so we're very much so looking forward to your presentation as you delve further into this topic. So I'll hand over the mic to you, take us through your presentation, and then we'll be back with some audience questions. A reminder to the audience as well that you can drop your questions as they come to mind into the chat, and we will read them at the end of Ms. Onu's presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Crystal. So my presentation today, when we're looking at financing innovation and climate resilience, one of the things I was challenged to do was talk about myself. And I said to Dr. Brandon, I said, really, you really want to talk about myself. So here it goes. I'll try and be brief, although it is a bit long, but just so that you understand, I work within the space of not just developmental work and working in a consulting field. About 6 years ago, I established Vakerie Capital, basically looking at addressing the gaps with access to finance. There's only so much you can do when you're working with the private sector or you're working with SMEs. And we always hit that roof. How do we access finance? So obviously, that is something I decided to really specialize and focus my efforts on as I am evolving. And I set up Vakerie Capital specifically at the moment. Its focus is more at looking at creating innovative business revenue models or financial models that could streamline a lot of businesses. So it's still relatively new, but I have a little bit of traction in terms of established key partnerships to focus on that. So I'll get into it. So in a nutshell, over 25 years, we kind of almost do nearly everything. But again, my background is heavily in governance and transformation. And when you put on a governance lens, it cuts across every single thing. It's really about problem solving and problem solving from a collective standpoint. So in terms of my application in this, I tend to focus more on ecosystem models. And when I'm working with startups, I tend to challenge them to kind of have a different perspective in terms of the mindset. I also do some supporting programs with women. I'm also very favorable with women empowerment. And in that context, I do a lot of financial literacy programs. I've partnered with Helen's Daughters, and I've been able to support them with a number of their academies in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and St. Kitts and Nevis, to name but a few. But just so to go along, my focus, generally speaking, and my passion has always been innovation. And I find when I look at the Sustainable Development Goals, while there's so many other goals I touch on, but I think I would say as a building block would be 9, which focuses on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And that plays out in the areas I focus on, the areas I work with, and so on. And of course, it does have a heavy focus on supporting financial inclusion and also financial innovation. So just as a context. And I also look at ways I can introduce and merge digital along with other sustainable movements. So it's kind of interesting as we are more or less looking at transitioning into low carbon economies, more resilient economies, just sustainability. Part of that conversation no one is talking about is the role that data plays and the role that digital plays, because what tends to happen is the stakeholders that are existing in all these other sectors have always focused on their sector, but not necessarily seen any ways for convergence. And now there's a greater emphasis of that convergence in order for us to really support climate action. And the fact that we're here in this call today is a testament, because some of you might be interning with CIMH, you might still be in the university, you might be focused on fields that are maybe in meteorology, climatology, but there is one single thing that is consistent with all of that: data, data, data. So data literally is like the lifeblood for us supporting climate action. So when you're thinking about areas to go on, and I think there was a question on how what use is using technologies to kind of bring visibility into these type of systems. There is value there, and maybe there is even an opportunity for you to tap into it. So we do create impact. We're local, but we work globally. And as you see later, apart from us doing the normal developmental work, we also have other strategic partnerships that pretty much map us all over the world. So let me specifically go into what we do in terms of venture development. So for, I would say, the majority of the 25 years of my existence and me in developing Quintessence, consulting firm, we have done a lot of private sector development, and even more so, started to really work directly one-on-one with entrepreneurs, both aspiring and existing, whether they're tech or climate innovation entrepreneurs, either way. And we take them really from the whole business planning concept right up to capital raising. And one of the important things you would recognize is when you are starting a business or when you're in business, there are different stages of your business, and each stage requires a different level of technical requirements and financial requirements as well. So this is something that we have done, but I would say in the last, I took a little bit of a hiatus from doing too much support on the demand side. I still do mentorships, but I've been really focusing at tackling this issue of access to finance, and then using that to kind of reincorporate it into supporting entrepreneurs and stuff. So some of the services we offer is managing business transition. Again, this is niche in that we always have persons who are SMEs, but not really focused on growing. And this type of leadership advisory helps them change their mindsets to help them scale. So this is something we do. And you can see it starts with human capital, value chain, business process, the whole 9 yards. We also support existing larger businesses in scaling. And so we do a lot of support for internationalization for not just customers who are in the Caribbean, but other parts of the world, and people who want to establish presence in there. So we do a lot of support for foreign direct investment, a startup foreign direct investment type of initiatives. And just so that you can see, we had an extensive track record, worked with a lot of entities and even partnered with some of them to launch programs. And what our focus had been, generally speaking, was of startups, mentors, and donor programs. So here's just a snapshot of some of the things we've done in the past. We've been able to support curation of projects for the Eastern Caribbean, and in partnership with the German Savings Bank and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. I believe that project focuses on building the capacity of entrepreneurs as well as banks as well, because we know we have to address some banks in terms of SME financing. We've done workshops. Here is a workshop in Suriname. We partnered with Pitch AgriHack, so supporting startups who want to kind of create their ideas and helping them through those tools, supporting in pitch competitions. And here you go. Here are young women, and I'm happy to say these two have actually gone ahead into university and finally graduated in tech. And they also have and maintain their own startup ideas. So I think supporting the pipeline is something we do. And of course, partnering with some events and so on. So lastly, under Quintessence and Vakerie Capital, one of our big achievements, and this is just when the pandemic hit, was we were able to have actually 2 programs accredited by Middlesex University. So because of the pandemic, we had to take a pause. So I'm hoping to kind of roll them out next year. And this is a perfect fit between how we are introducing the concept of digital financial market infrastructure with climate finance management. Because at the end of the day, you as a manager in transitioning, you have to understand what are these rails that you're going to be building off of, and what are these new technology tools. I mean, at the end of the day, the trajectory that we're heading as a world in digital finance, it's moving very fast. Already in the Eastern Caribbean, we've already piloted a central bank digital currency, even the Bahamas as well. The rest of the world is now taking up with this innovation. So cat's out of the bag, you know, this is just one of the things. And of course, AI is obviously a big part of that. So capacity building is something that is key. And just for you to know, for me to get here with the course, it was something that, like in business, you just have to take risks. I have skill sets. I've always done capacity building. I was like, I've always wanted to have a course that I can teach at the postgraduate level, even though I have not gone through the normal traditional cycles, you know, of a lecturer and so on, and gone through that big educational program to get there. And as Leisa said, you can only do certain things in terms of partnerships. So we partnered with Informa Connect, which provides a lot of financial sector training. And through their relationships, we're able to get the Middlesex University accreditation. And we have other universities that are knocking on the door, because to date, this is the only program of its kind. There are people talking about blockchain, people talking technology. No one is looking at how that invisible layer of our society, the digital financial market infrastructure, is being transformed, and how that itself is transforming climate finance. So that's just a little bit about sharing my journey. So as I said, focus now has really been on supporting the supply side ecosystem. And one of the things we've managed to do is start looking at new partnerships in that. So some of the things we do, even from the perspective of climate finance, obviously our markets, at least I live in the Eastern Caribbean, and even though we have a securities exchange, our market is not necessarily as developed. So for this, I needed to partner with a more global financial enterprise. So back in 2020, during the pandemic, something good happened. Well, things kind of shut down in business. You have to learn the word about pivoting and trying new things. So I managed to do a little bit of pivoting and reorganizing, and managed to partner with a multinational financial group, which is headquartered in Canada. They operate in 5 continents. And over the last 3 years, I've managed to not just make partner, but also I am their head of governance and compliance for the entire group of 19 companies. We have 3 banking licenses. We have a digital asset exchange, which I co-manage, and a number of different aspects. We also have funds. So taking that experience and applying it to this group and managing and developing their funds has been something I have been able to do. So real quick, when it comes to what we do to support clients that are transitioning, either for climate mitigation or climate, at the end of the day, from a financial standpoint, since the institution mainly deals with very high net worth clients and institutions, one of the things I looked at was how can we effectively pool funds and help mitigate risk. So out of that, I was able to develop a new product, which you could say protects their capital. So let's just say they have a fund and the fund has 10 million to start off with. What we do is we protect their principal, and we have some investment programs, since we do reserve banking, that they can leverage off of. And in doing so, we're able to give them a little bit above market returns, well, some guaranteed normal market returns, and then as per performance. So they can now not lose their principal, and they can now use the yields coming from the proceeds they're getting to now amplify their impact and do the investments. So these are very good for venture capitalists who generally have venture funds, and for venture funds, they normally bet on startups, basically. And in when they're investing, say, out of 100 startups, maybe 1 or 2 might be successful and the rest will fail. So they having a de-risking mechanism like this can help them amplify their impact. So what I'm now working on is to now try bring it from that 10 million to something smaller size, so we can appropriate it into our context in the region for smaller size funds. So this is something we're currently working on. The other dimension, other partnerships I established is working in the space of deep tech. So deep tech, not fintech, deep tech really focuses on merging the different fourth revolution technologies. So you're looking at blockchain, you're looking at artificial intelligence, you're looking at IoT. All of these things help drive and smarten, say, climate smart agriculture, for instance, and smarten the cities and everything. So this is why I said sustainability, climate, and digital kind of all work together, but you do need some fundamental technologies to work hand in hand. So through that partnership with Interstellar, so Interstellar pretty much is a critical infrastructure, blockchain infrastructure company. And we really focus on transforming all these legacy infrastructure. It's very different from fintech, because fintech generally supports the user experience, more client-friendly experience, but fintech doesn't really cover the legacy pipelines at the back end that are totally broken down, that don't function anymore. And so we're doing that. We've obviously out of Seychelles, but we've established in Nigeria and Ghana, just pretty much open office in Kenya, about to open in the UK and Egypt. And we've been doing some work on the African continent first. Obviously, we'll be moving to Caribbean very soon, but we are actually the first one supporting institutional adoption for blockchain. So banks are now converting the entire backend infrastructure and stuff with us. And out of Interstellar, we're able to develop a actual blockchain protocol by itself called Bantu, and that's under the Bantu Blockchain Foundation. And it's also, we have an operational company called PNS. So as I mentioned, we don't talk about all the things that happen in banking and in financial services that are just totally broken, right? Models are broken, everything is broken, but fintech just touches the surface. It doesn't go down beneath. So what we're doing is what other people don't. It's a long game, takes very long to monetize, and it's not for the, it's not for the faint-hearted who are looking for a quick buck. So enough about me, and let's go into, if you can bear with me 5 minutes, go into pretty much some of the financing, the innovations, and then how we can finance them real quick. So just one repeat, but we are living in a very connected world, which is creating a lot of demands on infrastructure and everything. On the one hand, you do have newer technologies like blockchain, which doesn't solve everything, but does have its use cases, especially when it comes to improving transparency. You want to have an audit trail, chain of custody, provenance, those type of things. It's really good at providing that, especially when you're looking in our context where we have smallholder farmers. We can't necessarily compete with bigger countries. So obviously it does make sense if we can incorporate some of these technologies to manage everybody and manage trust, because we're people that don't trust one another. We always say a partnership is a leaky ship. But guess what? If you have everyone in your network being paid at the same time, you don't have to talk to the next person, but you have a system that you can trust. So these are opportunities you yourself can co-create, ideate, come up with an idea. You have tools out there that you can leverage, but we do need some ideas and some projects that can tap into this when you think about entrepreneurship. Again, I mentioned what we do is help transform financial services. I won't mention too much. This is a little bit about Bantu. You're going to get the slides anyway. So my focus then is really about impact, what I will call impact innovations, because all these technologies come together to do what? The outcome we want is to amplify impact, whether it is climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, whether it is addressing some kind of co-benefits. It's all about how we can amplify impact and improve the quality of life. So when you are thinking about a startup that you want to start, think about what areas you are actually going to help and impact. And generally speaking, when we are speaking really about resilience, you have to think about areas that even our governments have prioritized. Things like food security. You know, we import almost everything. So how are you participating in helping solve that problem of food security, you know, and other areas for resilience? Here is a diagram that you can look at, perhaps whether it is you're applying it in agriculture or, you know, supply chain efficiency, waste management, circular economy. There are things that you need to kind of understand that while we are facing existential crisis, there are also lots of significant opportunities that I don't think we as a region are taking advantage of. And I'm telling you, startups or SMEs are very key in solving this climate issue and helping build resilience. We do need the technologies, the tools, the know-how, and the answers are all with you. So here is, when I was doing a mapping a couple of years ago, I was kind of mapping along Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, and seeing what is the climate smart landscape. And here you can see, as Lisa had mentioned, and she talked about value chain. So this is a perspective. You can pick any kind of value chain, whether it's a transportation value chain, renewable energy value chain, study it and try and figure out where in that space could you either apply, not necessarily technology, it could be a new way of doing things, right? New business model. That could be an innovation, etc. So that's a tool that can help you kind of identify new areas. And here is some, yes.
Yes, very quickly, just because we are quite a bit over time at this point. Do you have one or two more slides?
Yeah.
And then we can transition then to the questions, because we do have quite a few questions as well that are popping up in the chat for you as well. So we would love to be able to answer the audience questions along with your presentation. So I'll let you finish and wrap up, culminate, and then we'll transition into the questions.
Okay, sure. So I'll wrap up a little quickly. So in the past, we have run a blockchain accelerator targeting impact innovations, persons who already were working within different impact spaces, clean tech, agro, whatever, and wanting to amplify their business models by leveraging new use cases that a decentralized technology can help. Here's Farm's Eye out of St. Lucia. I know they're still working on their startup, but this is just an idea where even farmers need data. So when you're thinking about climate data services, don't just think of, oh, you know, it's a public good, Met Services offer it. It's huge. And it can be applied to almost anything, whether it's logistics or so on. So here are opportunities for you. Here's another startup that more or less, this is an agro-processor, but has incorporated sustainability. So we mentor this business. There's a startup out of West Africa and Cote d'Ivoire, and they focus on unlocking capital by doing cadastral systems. So they're using blockchain for the registry. And very recently, they started using AI-enabled surveys and tools and stuff like that. Are you thinking about circularity, and how you think about circularity? Here's a startup that pretty much takes waste matter like root crops, and then they cycle it into animal feed. So those are things that you can, opportunities that you can. And this is a startup that is actually leveraging and using a digital finance or DeFi to kind of fund farmers. And they work with farmer associations. They provide a lot of additional support. So it's not just the technology, but they use it as a tool to easily pay. So now that you know that, I'm just going to go quickly as to what are some of the ways we can finance it. So obviously a bigger way would be to kind of come together and set up funds. And I'm telling you, we don't have enough fund managers in our region. So if you are interested in finance, or even taking what you've done to add finance to it, it'll be useful if we have more emerging fund managers, because we need people to be able to manage the whole portfolios in order to drive finance. Because as SMEs and startups, it's hard for us to kind of get funds like from GCF unless we have them in these type of pools. On the investing side, we look at accelerating how we ourselves can be investors. So if you want, you can set up something where you can stimulate other people to invest as well. We mentioned things like peer-to-peer lending and the things, so I won't really talk about this. Want to leave you with something to think about. So a big area is tokenization, really. And this area is something that I'm working on as well, where you're able to then take a particular asset and then digitize it basically and trade it. So now that we've been talking about carbon, one of the things that we need to even looking at developing a carbon market as some of these tools, as well as some of the legislations. So those are some areas you want to explore. There's always a space for you in this space, and it's a way of fundraising. Also, coming down at a smaller scale, what are some things you can do? If you're looking at farmers, commodity financing, that's something that we haven't really explored. I don't know why we haven't done so. So this is definitely an opportunity in our region. I would say untapped opportunity. Micro insurance is also a big untapped opportunity. We need people who can use the data, from the data, create parametric insurance instruments. So that's also a big opportunity that you can now look, identify partners and come up with a model. So my focus has always been, and I'll kind of end with this slide before we go into questions, is in as much as you've now designed your model, identified what you want to do, it is very important to understand that when you are looking for financing, it happens at different stages. And so you have to design what we call a capital stack to support, because there are many different instruments. For instance, as an early stage startup, you're not going to go to a bank. So when I hear startups telling me, oh, I went to the bank, they don't want to lend me. Of course, the bank wouldn't lend you. You have to be proven. But in a space where you're not proven, that's not for you. So generally speaking, early stage, you're looking at friend, family, you're looking at grants, if you can get it, because you don't have to pay it back. And you're looking at a number of other instruments as well that are not going to be as restrictive. And as you go along the capital stack, there are many other funds for you. So this is something you need to keep in the back of your mind. So lastly, where can you right now tap into some opportunities? And I'm going to go really quick with this. Here is, I curated a few opportunities. So this Caribbean Climate Investment Fund can support if you want to go into like food security, adaptation, and so on. You can get up to $1 million, and it's grant money. So you should ask CIMH to prepare another workshop for you to help to teach you how to write proposals. Get Invest, it also is small, medium focus, and it's also for clean energy, energy access, and so on. And this one is good, because for those of you who are innovators and want to also incorporate AI, blockchain, or any other technology in addition to the solution, you can get 100,000 grant, and deadline 28th July. So please, I would like to hear that persons who attended this workshop actually applied. We missed a deadline just like 2 days ago, which was dealing with climate resilience, but don't worry, I will be providing an updated slide for this. And here's another one. And they also look at clean technologies. You get small grants, so if you partner with a nonprofit, even with your disaster management, and here you can always access these disaster risk management grants to do small projects, and that's available. And here's an example of some of the projects. This deadline just passed, but they always generally have it, so I just put it there so that you know. This was the climate resiliency challenge that just was concluded. And I spoke to the people at the Caribbean Climate Smart Fund. They can help you even from project preparation, because when you're trying to capture these large funds, there's still a lot that you need to put in. So it's not just about business planning. There might be a feasibility study that you need to do or so on. So this is flexible because they use philanthropic money. to provide a grant to help you prepare your projects. And then after that, they have a fund that can now help fund you. So there's a combination of VC, equity, and also debt in it. This is a private equity fund, obviously not for startups, but for larger companies. And this one too. So one that is missing, or the two that's missing that I will provide, is the GGGI. If you're a member of the Eastern Caribbean, you can still access the GGGI Green Loan program. I think the deadline is on the 17th. That's up. And I think I'll be sharing with the committee in Trinidad and Tobago. There is a new call for proposals as well. And then lastly, something for all of you is the Global Innovation Fund. And you'll get that in an updated slide. The Global Innovation Fund, it's rolling, it focuses on both women, and it can also focus on climate finance. And the reason I love it is because you can actually start with a proof of concept, a pilot, and get funding for that pilot so that it can take you through stages. And with that, I think we can go into questions.
Thank you, Ms. Onu. And I know that there is a plethora of information that we would love to provide our interns and as well as everyone here in the audience with us. And so I will go straight into the questions, but as Ms. Onu mentioned, she will be providing a copy of her presentation where you will be able to explore the resources that she has mentioned in her presentation. So you can look out for that. So our first question in the audience was, how would you categorize the current approach of the banking model towards startup entrepreneurs who are seeking loans in the Caribbean?
Good question. And I think I must have alluded to it prior. If you are a startup, banking is not for you. That's the end of the story. You have to be proven, but depending on where you are, they probably have some maybe guarantees. So like central banks and institutions can provide guarantees to the banks. So this is funding to the bank to say, okay, if it's a specific program, we're going to give you like 300,000 so you can lend maybe 350. If that person doesn't pay, here's the fund for you. This is supposed to encourage the banks to kind of on-lend to small businesses. So there are a few programs, like for example, in the Eastern Caribbean, there's the ECGCPC. Specifically when we're dealing with climate, I'm aware that the CARICOM Development Fund has a facility. It's not in all countries, but they're now rolling out the facility. It's very similar to ECPCGC, where they provide a guarantee, but it's specifically to support renewable energy. So I will add that as a resource. That's a great question. So in a nutshell, you want to get financing, you might want to maybe go to a credit union because that's like a people's bank. Once you are making your contributions, etc., it's a lower hanging fruit for you to access finance. And then of course, get a credit card, but know how to use the credit card because that's also a way of building your credit and you can get into the banking system.
Very true. And so thank you for that. And our next question is, has there been any real movement in the region regarding the valuation of carbon offsets, carbon credits in the region? And what are the main stumbling blocks to this?
Great question. So it's a conversation now. It's a conversation where a lot of people have interest. Case in point, from looking at St. Kitts and Nevis, when we were doing our study to look at uptake, in climate investment in the private sector, of course, you hear everyone talking about energy. Why? Because energy can be measured. What you can measure, you can pay for, You can see the reduction. That it's a very easy conversation for businesses. But their issue now is payback periods can be long, okay? they need to expend a lot. So even though the cost of renewable energy is coming down, it's still a big capital investment, and maybe payback might be a few years. So there needs to be some sort of connection to the grid where they can probably get something back, a discount from the grid, feed-in tariff, or some sort of smart type of smart metering or something like that. And seeing that that is not in place, because obviously you have another tension where the utility company is like, oh my goodness, if we provide this to everybody, we'll be out of business,
Right.
or maybe the grid can't even handle it. So we have to kind of manage it. So the conversation with carbon credits is like, okay, we don't need the grid. We don't need the utility company if we can now find a way of codifying these credits and selling it. So internationally, obviously, under Article 6, they're kind of finalizing the framework for that international market. But I do know, like, for instance, GGGI, not in the Caribbean, but they have started like a specialization in this area with some pilots. Basically, you do need legal frameworks in place. It's a lot. It's framework, technology, readiness. So if we want to be serious about it, we probably might need, and Leisha, you could probably create a full GCF package preparation to prepare the region for carbon credit, because it's awareness you need. We need the technology. We need the startups with these solutions, because how are we gonna be monitoring the credits? Like someone said, well, if a credit is done, how can you ensure that this is a real credit and not fraud? It has potential for that. It's almost like crypto. Face it, you're just tokenizing air, and all of a sudden it has value. So if it's an area you're interested in, I would say don't be faint-hearted. There are opportunities for you to research and actually get in the mix early. Time is now. I always look at a bouncing ball with trends and try and always be 5 years ahead. I'm always 10 years ahead. So be ahead, get in the game, be recognized for it, so that when we're ready to implement, we have you as the experts that can now take us forward.
Absolutely, yes. Be early on the trends. And this is a time, as you said, to learn more about it, because it's a vast open field, because there aren't many players in the sector. So moving on to our next question. So outside of a business plan, is there anything else that an entrepreneur will need before applying for services like yours?
Okay, so that business plan question, for me, it's here or there. Like I said, I think within the context, you do need planning. I agree with that. But the business plan in the traditional way is not always going to fly, at least not with me, and not with some areas. Why I say this, I'm not saying the business plan is poor. The way we used to do business planning isn't going to fly. But if you're going to the bank, oh yes, they want to see a detailed business plan. So you put this fancy 40-page, 50-page plan with all the stuff in it. It's great, but it's just a snapshot. What happens when you're actually working in your business? Alicia can tell you, every day it's something different. And as an entrepreneur, even as a female entrepreneur, it's a million other things happening at the same time. I'm chief cook, bottle washer, I'm doing this and that, things happen. You have emergencies and you have to keep tweaking your model. So what is more important, at least in the beginning, is making sure you understand the business logic. So this whole, maybe you've heard of business model canvas. It's not just 9 blocks. It's how the business creates value.
Right.
You need to understand that value creation principle, and not just even the business model. Let's start with your customer. You ask people, who are your customers? Oh, I'm catering to everybody. Wrong answer. You need to kind of get to the person like, okay, this is Tiffany. She's 20. This is what she does when she wakes up. These are her pain points. These are shark bites where if she doesn't get this done, she has a horrible day. And you answer those shark bites, you have a business, because you're now meeting people where they are. And you need to understand the customer, not just on a superficial, oh yeah, I'm just dealing with female entrepreneurs. No, what age, what stage, where they're in their life, what are their needs, and what are their emotional triggers? It's about neuroscience. So I would suggest you guys do a little course in neuroscience, because that's how they trick us with all these ads. You need to understand that we make decisions based on our emotion, and you have to understand your customer. Once you understand your customer at that emotive level, and you can now address their pain points, you then have your value proposition. Now you can go to that business model canvas and lay it out, and you're going to realize for each particular customer segment type, your value proposition changes. So you're telling me you have 5, how are you going to handle all of that? You then now have to pare down and focus. So it is a very useful tool. And once you can get down to that, then of course now you can now capture, well, how's it making money? You have the what, the how, how's this making money? What is the revenue model? What makes it tick? I've seen business plans that when you analyze it, I'm like, what's going on here? The market don't fit what the financials are. Then you know they ask someone to write it for them. Just because it's pretty, it doesn't mean it's right, you know? So when you can get to that point of doing at least that level yourself and then going to the expert to help you finesse it, I would say that's the level of business planning. And then lastly, go to market. How are you penetrating that market? What are the strategies? For me, that's key, right? And then of course, presenting the fact that maybe you did some pilots and these pilots were successful, testing, especially in the early stages, because you don't have any other proof or evidence. So if you have a big concept, you need to start with something small. Okay, well, I try a little pilot. I did something like this just to test this and it worked. And you make sure you record it. So when you're talking to a potential investor, say, listen, I know this is a big ask, but I've at least tried this, I've done this, and so on and so forth. So for me, that business plan question is, it depends on the stages. Yes, it comes to the point, maybe when you're in mid-stage, you do need a very comprehensive plan. If you're going after GCF funds, obviously to complement that, they might want to see a big market study done, you know, feasibility, you know, environmental impact, this and that, but don't worry, they have facilities and they have funds. You can actually go for that. The important thing is for you to be able to articulate your concept in a very high level. And once you can articulate your concept, you need support for feasibility studies. They have funds that just focus on project preparation and grants. That's how you can use grant money.
Absolutely. And so we do have a few more questions that are in the chat, and possibly then, Telly, maybe you can hop into the chat and answer a few of these questions for us. So there are, I think, 3 more questions that I didn't get to, but we are quite a bit over time. And so I would like to thank all the persons who are here with us for, you know, engaging and as well as making this as interactive as possible. I love your questions, and I know that you have gotten quite a bit of valuable information in the topic this evening on funding. So before we kind of transition to our closing remarks from both our speakers, what I would like to do is launch our second polling question. And now that you've heard the presentations from our speakers, our follow-up question in the poll is actually, so I'll launch the question now, and it says, please select the funding sources that are accessible to you. So which ones now do you believe, after you've learned a bit more about some of these other mechanisms, which ones are accessible to you as an entrepreneur or even as an aspiring entrepreneur? And I'll give you a few moments to answer those questions. And I invite Ms. Perch then to give us her closing remarks and final comments here in the CLIP speaker series.
I'm still kind of processing all of that wonderful wealth of information that Telly shared. My final remarks would be that it's, there is a wide world out there and there are multiple opportunities. As Telly says, you can, it depends on how you tackle the issue, but there are numerous opportunities out there that can be accessed. As you go into this, you want to make sure that you do some analysis to understand what's going on in the market that you think you want to work in. What are the gaps? What are the opportunities? Where are the niche spaces, and where do you fit? Even if it's not your niche, is it a niche you can make for yourself? That's also entrepreneurship. It doesn't always work where you work with something that you have, or you can, but then it adapts and it molds. I think it's important to really secure that space and be very clear about what it is that you want to achieve. What kind of economic or environmental or other form of impact do you want to achieve by your business? And how do you want to go about doing that on a long-term basis? Partnership. When they say that no man is an island, that also is an issue in business. Even when you're running a sole operation, there are people behind the scenes, even if they're cheering you on. Cheerleaders also count in this process. There's family, that's providing advice, or sometimes lending you money as you address or meet with the normal income flow issues. But partnership, I find, particularly when you're starting out in a space, and even if you do your analysis, it's hard to know everything. That is often a way to manage your risk while experimenting. So if I think about what Telly says, in terms of innovation is brilliant, it's wonderful, but it does come with risk. And one way of managing that risk is to really think about your partnerships. Sometimes that means that you will partner with somebody on the risk. Sometimes that means that you work with your partners to maintain a certain type of income while you're exploring a new area. I would like to make a plug for the fact that sustainability consulting and social impact and social consulting perhaps is a rather newer area in the consulting field, but it is definitely one that is very busy and continues to need a lot of different input. So I would want to encourage those here to kind of think about that as a space that they want to get involved in, either individually or collectively. And don't be afraid to also tackle some of the issues that we've been talking about in terms of access to funds and instruments. We also need ideas and tools and technologies, even if the funding is there, to make sure that it moves, to make sure that it gets to the right people, to make sure that it's used effectively and that we can be accountable for what we did to it, but also to make sure that it actually plants seeds that can grow into trees or mangroves, perhaps. So those are my last words, and looking forward to continuing the discussions. Thanks again.
So yes, thank you, Ms. Perch, for joining us here on the CLIP Speaker Series. We really appreciate the wealth of wisdom that you've brought to this discussion. And before I transition to Ms. Onu to give her final words, I invite the audience as well to drop your final takeaways that you've gotten this evening from our two presenters. What stuck out to you? What were some of the things that you've learned, or things that you will want to learn more about, or you're interested in exploring now that you've gotten a taste then of the information that was shared this evening or even in previous sessions? So please drop in the comments any key takeaways that you have. And as well, now, Ms. Onu, your final words before we wrap up this evening's session.
Okay, I was just looking at the questions, a lot of them. One is on circular economy. So I'll come back to that. So I think my key takeaway is, while we are looking at different opportunities in the area of climate, the tendency of always going to renewable energy is great, but you must remember, we have to build our own resilience, be it resilience, climate proofing, and all of that. And that does require a lot of resources, but it does also push us to kind of create more innovative models in order to get funded. And maybe you can even blend clean energy, mix it up, climate mitigation with climate adaptation. So that's one takeaway. Two, if you're just starting out and you're not really sure, I think, as we said, just because you have studied a particular career or topic or course, it doesn't mean you're relegated to that. Actually, it adds value, because look at me. I probably have, if you go through all my degrees, it's different, but it just means I see things differently and I can apply different things to whatever I'm doing. So it's all about application and execution. So I challenge you to kind of sit down and see, look around you, look in your country and see what are the areas that perhaps no one is solving this problem, and how can I come up with an idea to solve this problem, because we do need global problem solvers. That's why I say governance. So that's 2. 3, mindset is very important. Being an entrepreneur looks glamorous. It is challenging. So you have to dig deep and find some areas that you do actually have some level of a passion for, because when the going gets rough, you have to try and stick with it, you know. In all of that, we're not talking about real things like, even though you're getting paid, the delays in the payments, etc., cash flow, the whole 9 yards is running a real business, right? So your mindset needs to be very positive, needs to be very entrenched. So I would say seek out and try and also do some personal development on your side as well. And don't be afraid to try new things and test new things. Thank you. Be early on trends, correct. Yes, be early on trends. Even though it might be difficult and people might look at you and say, well, what are you really doing? What are you really talking about? I will never forget when I did e-commerce in a time when they said, what is that, electronics?
Absolutely. And now we couldn't live without it, right?
Now 20 years later, they're doing e-commerce or workshop. I said, we're still there, you know. So
Absolutely.
yeah, try, don't be afraid to fail. I think that is what I'll leave you with. I test, if you notice, there's some things in there when it comes to financial modeling. You try a thing, you test it. Does it work? You go back to the drawing board. What happens over time? You're creating certain patterns, you know, almost like how AI really works, but how you work in the real, you have to create those patterns of success. So don't be afraid to fail forward.
Thank you so much, Ms. Onu and Ms. Perch. This was such an engaging and full of wisdom, full of gems that I know that the entrepreneurs and as well as our viewing audience here will be able to walk away with tons of things to go and research and explore further and find out more information as they look into finding the value that they want to offer in this sector in the Caribbean region. We look forward to seeing many spin-offs of entrepreneurship ventures through this Clip Speaker series. So thank you both for contributing to the conversation, because finance is one of the leading things that most persons often have stumbling blocks in how to handle that. And I believe that you both have presented quite a bit of information that we can look to address those issues under the topic of funding our climate action initiatives. So I wanted to quickly share the results of the second poll before we wrap up. And what is interesting is that in the beginning, we shared, you know, what mechanisms or what instruments we know of, that we know of loans, we know of savings, we know of grant funding. But on the contrary, the leading thing that most persons say they have the most access to, or we believe we have the most access to, is our own funding. And so I'm hopeful that through the presentation this evening, and even from the resources that you get after this session, you'll find other ways, as Ms. Unam and Ms. Perch mentioned earlier, there are other mechanisms that you can look into, whether it is grants or other tools that you can use, whether it's crowdfunding and other areas that are low risk for you to explore to finance your project, especially in the early stages, and not necessarily going into loans, because those may be more difficult to access. So I hope that you have been dropping your key takeaways in the comments. And so we would culminate this session this evening. I do want to take a moment to say some thank yous to some persons as well for making this possible. So yes, we have come to the end of the session, but we want to say a special thanks to all the entrepreneurs who presented in the Clip Speaker series. And so we start with our first presentation that we had, Mr. Joshua Forth and Miss Christina Pooler, who spoke on the topic of climate smart agriculture. Then we transitioned to Dr. Ashley John and Mr. Elijah James, who spoke on the topic of climate adaptation technologies. And tonight we have graced with the two wonderful female entrepreneurs, Miss Leisa Perch and Miss Vakerie Onu, who spoke on the topic of funding innovation for climate resilience. And we would love to thank all our speakers and entrepreneurs who shared their knowledge with our audience and with our interns through this Clip Speaker series. Special thanks as well to the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, the Strengthening Disaster Resilience in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean Project, and as well as the Caribbean Youth Livelihood Internship Program for hosting this speaker series. Thank you for everyone who joined us, and we trust that today's presentations and presentations of the past on the topic of for funding innovation for climate resilience was thought-provoking and inspiring you to take action in your endeavors. So have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for joining us. Good evening.
The time is now for regional governments to develop and implement disruptive and forward-thinking program concepts, policies, and platforms that fast-track the development of a Caribbean technology economy. At the core of this, my friends, transformation must be the sustainable maximization of our most highly valued assets. You know them, and I know them. Our people, our ideas, our geography, our climate, yes, our climate, and our culture.